Blood and loyalty run the underworld, but what happens when a ruthless mafia boss betrays the one woman holding all his secrets? She wasn't a supermodel. She was his chubby, brilliant assistant. When he chose his glamorous fiancée over her, she didn't just walk away. She took the keys to his empire. To the glittering, ruthless society of the Chicago underworld, Penelope Hayes was entirely invisible. She wasn't the type of woman mobsters looked twice at. At 5'4" and a solid size 22, Penelope didn't fit the mob wife aesthetic. She had a soft, round face, thick thighs that rubbed together when she walked, and a stomach that couldn't be hidden by the expensive, tailored blazers she ordered from specialty plus-size boutiques. In a world of stilettos, Botox, and dangerous allure, Penelope was a comfortable pair of orthopedics. But Victor Romano didn't hire her for her waistline. 4 years ago, Victor had just taken over the Romano syndicate after his father's sudden, violent stroke. The organization was bleeding money, hemorrhaging territory to the Irish factions on the south side, and drowning in sloppy bookkeeping that the feds were slowly piecing together. Penelope, then a 24-year-old forensic accountant quietly working for a corrupt logistics firm, had noticed the discrepancies. Instead of running to the FBI, she marched into Victor's office at the back of the Grand Vista Hotel and handed him a ledger that mapped out exactly which of his capos were stealing from him. Victor had hired her on the spot. Over the next 4 years, Penelope became the undisputed, unspoken queen of the Romano Empire. She didn't hold a gun, but she held the passwords to 37 offshore accounts in the Caymans. She knew precisely how to launder $2 million of extortion money through high-end real estate developments in the West Loop. She knew that Joey the Ox Lombardi was allergic to peanuts, that the chief of police preferred bribes paid in antique gold coins, and that Victor took his coffee black, but needed exactly 2 fingers of Macallan 18-year-old Scotch when a hit went wrong. She was his shadow. They spent 80 hours a week together. While Victor handled the blood and the fear, Penelope handled the brain power. They existed in a strange, intimate symbiosis. Late nights in his penthouse office overlooking the Chicago skyline were their sanctuary. Victor, a man carved from marble and violence, with sharp Italian features and eyes like shattered ice, would loosen his tie, pour them both a drink, and listen to her. "The shell companies in Delaware are fully insulated," Penelope said one rainy Tuesday at 2 a.m. She adjusted her glasses, leaning back in the plush leather chair that always felt a bit too tight around her hips. "If the DEA hits the ports tomorrow, they'll find nothing but imported olive oil and tax-compliant paperwork." Victor smiled. It was a rare, genuine expression, reserved only for her. "What would I do without you, Pen?" "Go to federal prison, probably," she replied dryly, taking a sip of the scotch. "Never," he said softly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "You're the only one I trust. The only one who doesn't want something from me. You're my right hand." Penelope's heart did a traitorous little flip. She knew better than to fall for Victor Romano. He dated runway models, actresses, and the daughters of Russian oligarchs. Women who didn't count calories. Women who looked stunning in backless silk gowns. But in those quiet, desperate hours, the lines blurred. Penelope loved him, not just as a boss, but as the man who saw her mind when the rest of the world only saw a fat girl. But the underworld is rarely kind to unspoken fairy tales. The crisis began in October. The Romano syndicate was facing a two-front war against the Albanian mob, and Victor's resources were stretched dangerously thin. To secure his borders, his advisors pushed for the oldest mafia tradition in the book, an arranged marriage to forge an unbreakable alliance. The target was the Conti family, out of New York, and the bride was Isabella Conti. When Victor told Penelope the news, he didn't look her in the eye. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the rain. "It's strictly business, Pen. The Contis have the political muscle we need. Isabella will move into the estate next week. We announce the engagement at the winter gala." Penelope felt the cold grip of reality close around her throat, suffocating that foolish, hopeful part of her heart. "Understood." She kept her voice perfectly neutral, typing away on her encrypted tablet. "I'll arrange for her flight from JFK, clear out the master suite, and draft the prenuptial agreement. Do you want the standard infidelity clauses included?" Victor turned, looking almost pained. "Penelope, don't be like that. Nothing changes between us. You're still running the show. She's just a figurehead for the cameras and the capos." "Of course, Victor," Penelope lied. "It's just business." If Penelope was the invisible backbone of the Romano syndicate, Isabella Conti was the blinding spotlight. Isabella arrived in Chicago like a hurricane clad in Prada. She was impossibly thin, a waif of a woman with razor-sharp cheekbones, cascading raven hair, and a cruel, calculating intelligence hiding behind pouty lips. She was mafia royalty, born and bred to be the matriarch of a violent empire. From the moment Isabella stepped foot in the penthouse office, she identified Penelope not as a threat to Victor's heart, because to Isabella, fat women didn't register as sexual competitors, but as a threat to her own authority. Isabella wanted total control over Victor's life, and this pudgy, bespectacled assistant holding the keys to the kingdom was an immediate annoyance. The microaggressions started small. "Victor, darling," Isabella purred one afternoon, sprawling across the leather sofa, while Penelope reviewed the quarterly laundering metrics. "Does your assistant really need to breathe so heavily while we work? And perhaps we could get her a sturdier chair. I'm terrified that one is going to snap under the strain." Penelope's face burned hot. She froze, her thick fingers hovering over her keyboard. She looked at Victor, waiting for him to shut it down. To tell his fiancée that Penelope was the reason he wasn't currently in a federal penitentiary. Victor just cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "Isabella, Pen is working. Let's not. Let's not." Not a defense, not a reprimand, just a mild deflection. The cuts grew deeper over the next month. Isabella would purposefully spill coffee on Penelope's meticulously organized tax briefs, claiming her clumsiness. She would order Penelope to pick up her dry cleaning or fetch her green juices, tasks completely outside the realm of an executive fixer. When Penelope tried to refuse, pointing out that she was busy masking a $3 million deficit, Isabella would turn on the tears, manipulating Victor. "Victor, she's so disrespectful to me. If your men see your assistant treating your future wife like a nuisance, how will the Contis react? My father demands respect." And Victor, backed into a corner by the fragile alliance, would sigh and look at Penelope with pleading eyes. "Just do it, Pen. Keep the peace." Penelope swallowed her pride. She fetched the juice. She picked up the dry cleaning. She worked until 4 a.m., fixing the messes Isabella purposefully caused. She did it because she believed Victor's promise. "Nothing changes between us." Then came the night of the winter gala at the Waldorf Astoria. This wasn't just a party. It was the official merging of the Romano and Conti empires. The ballroom was packed with politicians, judges, and the most dangerous men in the country. Penelope had spent 3 weeks organizing it. She had bribed the city inspectors to keep the police away, vetted every caterer for assassination risks, and arranged the seating chart so rival capos wouldn't slit each other's throats over the caviar. She bought a new dress for the occasion. It was a deep emerald green, velvet, wrapping around her curves beautifully. For the first time in years, as she looked in the mirror, Penelope didn't feel like the invisible, chubby assistant. She felt powerful. She arrived at the ballroom an hour early to run the final security checks. Victor was already there, looking devastatingly handsome in a tailored tuxedo, standing beside Isabella, who wore a custom white silk gown that clung to her emaciated frame. As Penelope approached with the final security manifest, Isabella's eyes narrowed into slits of pure venom. "What is she doing here?" Isabella hissed, loud enough for the surrounding lieutenants, men Penelope had saved from prison, to hear. "Isabella, Penn is running the logistics for tonight," Victor said, checking his watch. "No, absolutely not." Isabella's voice rose, shrill and demanding. She pointed a manicured finger at Penelope's emerald dress. "Look at her, Victor. She looks like a stuffed olive. The press is outside. The mayor is coming. I will not have my engagement photos tainted by some sweaty, overweight secretary waddling around the VIP section. It's embarrassing." The ballroom went dead silent. The lieutenants looked away. Penelope's heart shattered in her chest, the pieces shredding her lungs. The humiliation was so acute it tasted like copper in her mouth. She stood frozen, the velvet dress suddenly feeling like a clown suit. She looked at Victor. "This is it," she thought. "This is where you tell her I run this family. This is where you defend me." Victor looked at Penelope. Then he looked at Isabella, then at the Contian forces standing by the door. The alliance, the money, the power. Victor stepped forward and gently put his hand on Penelope's arm. His voice was low, laced with a pity that made Penelope want to vomit. "Penn," Victor whispered, "go down to the basement monitoring room with the security guys. Just stay out of sight for tonight. Let Isabella have her moment. You can monitor the cameras from there. I'll make it up to you tomorrow." Penelope stared at the hand on her arm. The hand of a man who had trusted her with his life, his freedom, and his empire, but who was too much of a coward to stand up for her basic humanity. He was choosing the aesthetic. He was choosing the mafia princess. She was just the fat girl in the basement. Something broke inside Penelope Hayes. It wasn't a loud, dramatic snap. It was a quiet, permanent severing of loyalty. She looked up, meeting Victor's eyes. Her expression was completely devoid of the warmth she had given him for 4 years. She pulled her arm away from his grip. "Of course, boss," Penelope said, her voice eerily calm. She handed him the security manifest. "Congratulations on your engagement." She turned and walked away. But Penelope didn't go to the basement. She walked out the gilded front doors of the Waldorf Astoria into the freezing Chicago night and hailed a cab. Victor Romano thought he had just sent his assistant out of sight to keep the peace. He had no idea that as she sat in the back of the taxi, Penelope was already pulling out her encrypted tablet, accessing the master servers, and initiating the protocol she had secretly built for this exact moment. He chose his fiancée. Now he was going to lose everything else. The interior of the yellow cab smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap pine air freshener, but to Penelope Hayes, it was the scent of absolute liberation. As the taxi sped away from the glittering facade of the Waldorf Astoria, she balanced her encrypted matte black tablet on her lap. The velvet of her emerald dress, which just 20 minutes prior had felt like a symbol of her quiet hopes, now served as the armor for her cold, calculated vengeance. Her thick fingers flew across the digital keyboard with the precision of a concert pianist. For 4 years, she had built the digital and financial infrastructure of the Romano Syndicate. She knew every back door, every hidden firewall, and every dummy corporation because she had created them. She had always left a fail-safe, a ghost protocol she ironically named Operation Icarus, just in case Victor ever turned on her. She just never expected the betrayal to be so profoundly petty and humiliating. "Take me to O'Hare," Penelope instructed the driver, her voice steady and devoid of the tears she refused to shed. "Terminal 5, International." As the cab merged onto the Kennedy Expressway, Penelope executed the first phase. She bypassed the biometric security on the Cayman Island offshore accounts. 37 accounts, holding a combined liquid asset value of $42 million. With 3 keystrokes, she initiated a cascading wire transfer. The money didn't just move, it vanished into a labyrinth of decentralized crypto wallets and anonymous Swiss trusts she had established under the alias PH Holdings. Next were the properties. The lucrative West Loop developments, the warehouses in the meat-packing district, the underground casinos operating out of River North. She digitally transferred the holding deeds to a rival syndicate's shell company, effectively changing ownership overnight without a single gunshot fired. Finally, she opened the secure messaging app used by the Chicago Police Department's anti-corruption unit and the local DEA field office. She uploaded a meticulously redacted ledger. It didn't implicate her, nor did it directly give away Victor's immediate location, but it provided the exact shipping container numbers, port arrival times, and manifest discrepancies for the Romano family's incoming shipments of illegal firearms and contraband. She pressed send. By the time Penelope walked through the sliding glass doors of O'Hare International Airport, Victor Romano was already a ruined man. He just didn't know it yet. He was still drinking champagne, smiling for the cameras with his razor-thin fiancée, completely unaware that his empire had been systematically dismantled by the fat girl he had banished to the basement. The fallout hit the Romano penthouse at exactly 7 a.m. the following morning. Victor was nursing a mild hangover, pouring a cup of black coffee, while Isabella lounged on the white silk sheets of the master bed, complaining about the size of the centerpieces at the gala. "They were completely disproportionate, Victor," Isabella whined, examining her flawless manicure. "And my father agrees. The Contes expect a certain standard of elegance. We cannot have your people managing the wedding. We need to hire professionals from Manhattan." Before Victor could muster a placating response, the heavy oak doors of the penthouse office burst open. Dominic, Victor's heavily muscled and usually unshakable head of security, barged in, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Boss," Dominic gasped, ignoring Isabella's indignant shriek at the intrusion. "You need to see this. Now!" Victor rushed into the office, his heart hammering against his ribs. The bank of monitors on Penelope's usually pristine desk was flashing red. Error codes and zero-balance notifications covered every screen. "What happened?" Victor demanded, slamming his coffee mug onto the mahogany desk. "Where is Penelope? Call her. Get her up here to fix this." "I tried, boss," Dominic said, his voice trembling. "Her phone is disconnected. Her apartment is completely cleaned out. And the feds just raided the docks. They seized the entire shipment from Marseille. 3 million in merchandise. Gone. The Port Authority Commissioner said someone revoked our immunity paperwork at midnight." Victor stared at the screens, the blood draining from his face as the horrific reality began to snap into focus. He reached for the keyboard, trying to log into the Master Cayman account. Access denied. Account liquidated. He tried the Delaware shell companies. Access denied. Entity transferred. "No," Victor whispered, stumbling back. "No, she wouldn't. She couldn't." "Victor, what is going on?" Isabella demanded, marching into the office wrapped in a silk robe, her perfectly contoured face twisted in annoyance. "Who is screaming?" "Shut up, Isabella," Victor snapped, his composure shattering. He frantically dug through the drawers of Penelope's desk. It was empty, save for a single manila folder placed dead center. Victor tore it open. Inside was a detailed financial dossier. It wasn't his own. It was the Conti family's. Penelope had spent the last month quietly digging into his new bride's background. The documents proved unequivocally that the fearsome Conti family of New York was entirely bankrupt. They had been surviving on loans from the Russian mob and were using the marriage to Isabella to drain Victor's assets to pay off their own debts. Attached to the front of the dossier was a single, yellow sticky note written in Penelope's neat, cursive handwriting. "You chose the aesthetic. I hope she's worth the price of your empire." P. The ensuing weeks were a masterclass in psychological and financial devastation. Without Penelope to balance the books, pay the bribes, and placate the aggressive rival factions, the Romano syndicate imploded. The Irish mob, led by the ruthless Declan Gallagher, swept into the South Side, taking over the territories Penelope had subtly weakened. Victor's own capos, unpaid and terrified of the sudden federal heat, began defecting by the dozens. The glittering illusion of Isabella Conti evaporated just as quickly. When she realized Victor was effectively broke and entirely out of power, her sweet, manipulative purr turned into vicious shrieking. She packed her Louis Vuitton trunks and fled back to New York on a commercial flight, leaving her engagement ring on the kitchen counter. The Conti alliance was nothing but a hollow lie, and Victor had sacrificed the only woman who ever truly protected him for a mirage of power. Victor spent 6 agonizing months trying to find Penelope. He hired private investigators, utilized dark web trackers, and called in every favor he had left. But Penelope Hayes was a ghost. She had erased her digital footprint with the same meticulous brilliance she had used to build his fortune. He spent his nights in a cheap, fortified safe house, drinking cheap whiskey, haunted by the memory of her emerald dress and the cold, dead look in her eyes before she walked out of the ballroom. He had looked at her and seen a liability. He now understood she had been his god. The Chicago underworld did not tolerate a vacuum. By the time winter thawed into a bitter, rainy spring, a new apex predator had taken control of the city's shadows. The streets whispered of a mysterious new financial backer operating behind Declan Gallagher's muscle. They called this invisible broker the Architect. Under the Architect's guidance, the Irish and the remaining independent factions unified into a massive, impenetrable corporate syndicate. They bought politicians instead of threatening them. They laundered money through sovereign wealth funds instead of cheap real estate. It was a level of sophisticated, white-collar crime that left the FBI chasing shadows. Victor Romano, now reduced to commanding a pathetic crew of 10 loyalists in a dilapidated warehouse in Gary, Indiana, had a bounty on his head. The Russian creditors, realizing the Contis couldn't pay them, had come looking for the Romano assets. Cornered, bankrupt, and out of options, Victor swallowed the last agonizing shred of his pride. He sent an emissary to Declan Gallagher, begging for a sit-down with the Architect. He wanted to negotiate his surrender in exchange for his life and safe passage out of the country. The meeting was granted. Victor was chauffeured to a sprawling, ultra-modern estate overlooking Lake Michigan. It was a fortress of glass, steel, and private security contractors carrying automatic weapons. Dominic walked beside him, both men stripped of their weapons at the door. They were escorted into a massive, sunlit boardroom. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the churning grey lake. Sitting at the head of a massive slab of imported black marble was a heavy leather executive chair, turned away from them, facing the water. Declan Gallagher, a terrifying man with a scarred jaw and cold blue eyes, stood by the wall, arms crossed, looking entirely deferential to the person in the chair. "Sit, Victor!" Declan barked, gesturing to the uncomfortable wooden chairs opposite the desk. Victor sat, his hands trembling slightly. He cleared his throat, trying to summon the ghost of the fearsome mafia boss he used to be. "I appreciate the meeting. I want to speak to the architect. I have terms for my complete withdrawal from the tri-state territory." "Terms?" The voice that floated from the high-backed leather chair was soft, melodic, and struck Victor's chest like a physical bullet. "You don't have the leverage for terms, Victor. You're here to accept the charity of your betters." The leather chair slowly swiveled around. Victor stopped breathing. Dominic let out a strangled, breathless gasp. Sitting before them, flanked by heavily armed guards, was Penelope Hayes. She had not undergone some miraculous cliché transformation. She was still fat. Her face was still round and soft. But the timid, invisible assistant in the tight blazers was gone. Penelope wore a custom-tailored, stark white power suit that fit her curves with aggressive, unapologetic perfection. Her hair was styled in a sleek, powerful blunt cut, and diamonds, real, blinding, flawless diamonds, rested at her throat and on her fingers. She exuded an aura of absolute, terrifying power. She didn't look like a mob wife. She looked like the CEO of a deadly Fortune 500 company. "Penelope," Victor choked out, the name scraping against his dry throat. You're the architect." "Please, call me Ms. Hayes," Penelope said calmly, steepling her fingers on the marble desk. Penelope was the girl who fetched Isabella's green juice. She doesn't exist anymore. "You did this," Victor whispered, a mix of awe and horror washing over him. "You tore down my entire life. You gave it all to Gallagher." Penelope laughed, a rich, dark sound that held no humor. "Gave it. Victor, please. I didn't give Gallagher anything. I bought his loyalty. I bought his muscle. I am his boss. I took the $42 million you so carelessly left in my custody, and I bought my own seat at the table. I realized that for 4 years I was driving the car from the back seat while you pretended to hold the wheel. I just decided to throw you out of the vehicle." Victor stared at the woman he had discarded for an aesthetic, the woman he had banished to the basement. The sheer, overwhelming reality of his stupidity crushed him. "Pen," he pleaded, leaning forward, his voice cracking. "I was wrong. I was so arrogant. Isabella was a mistake. I see that now. We were a team. We built that empire together. You and me. Come back to me. We can rebuild. We can rule this city together." Declan Gallagher snorted from the corner, shaking his head in disgust. Penelope's expression remained entirely impassive. She looked at Victor, not with anger, but with the cold, clinical detachment of a scientist observing a dying insect. "Rule together?" Penelope echoed softly. "Victor, look around you. I already rule this city. I don't need a figurehead whose primary skill is shooting people and buying expensive suits. You were never my equal. You were my employer, and your services are no longer required." She slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the marble desk. It stopped perfectly in front of Victor. "Inside," Penelope instructed, her tone dropping to a chilling, absolute zero. "Is a plane ticket to Buenos Aires, a fake passport, and a bank card with exactly $100,000 on it. It's severance pay. You and Dominic will get on that plane tonight. If you ever set foot in North America again, Declan's men will put a bullet in your head and leave your body in a landfill." Victor opened the folder. His hands shook violently. $100,000. A pittance. A cruel joke compared to the tens of millions he once commanded. He looked up at Penelope, his dark eyes brimming with unshed tears of humiliation and profound loss. "You're leaving me with nothing." "I am leaving you with your life," Penelope corrected him sharply, leaning forward, her dark eyes flashing with sudden, fierce intensity. "Which is far more than you deserved after you stood in that ballroom and let that walking skeleton humiliate me while you chose her over the woman holding your world together. You thought I was weak because I was fat. You thought I was disposable because I wasn't beautiful in the way your fragile ego demanded. You were wrong." Victor swallowed hard. There were no arguments left, no manipulations that could save him. He picked up the folder, feeling the crushing weight of his failure. He stood up slowly, a broken, defeated man. "I'm sorry, Penelope," he whispered. "I know," she replied coldly. "Goodbye, Victor." As Victor and Dominic were escorted out of the glass fortress, Penelope turned her chair back toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the gray waters of Lake Michigan churn. She poured herself exactly 2 fingers of Macallan 18-year-old scotch, took a slow sip, and smiled. The Chicago skyline belonged to her now, and the view from the top was absolutely breathtaking. Revenge is a dish best served with absolute financial ruin. Penelope proved that loyalty isn't a given, and underestimating someone based on their appearance is the fastest way to lose your empire. What did you think of Penelope's ultimate takeover? Did Victor get exactly what he deserved, or was her revenge too cold? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more intense, real-life mafia drama and storytelling.